Congratulations, sir! You have just given me my $1 million!
Expecting it to sell over 10 million in the run-up to Christmas on a global basis. You know, it's the biggest launch of the year, really.
Great! Well, what do I win?
Nothing! Now get out!
I think most human beings would agree that if you were in possession of a money-making machine, you probably wouldn't file a lawsuit against it, accuse it of corporate espionage, interrogate it, escort it out of your building by security, and essentially allow it to join your direct competitor, EA.
Evil!
But in the year 2010 of our Lord, that is exactly what Activision did.
Otherwise known as evil!
These two men right here are Vince Zampella and Jason West, co-founders of Infinity Ward and the men who gave birth to Call of Duty, who walked and then ran so this franchise could sprint and then trip and eat shit over and over and over and over. Call of Duty was at astronomical levels of success and cultural impact between 2007 and 2010, having overtaken Halo as the #1 FPS game in the world. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was a massive success in 2007, and almost all of COD's claim to fame and spot as the #1 selling game 95% of the years since can be linked back to its success, which only continued to skyrocket once Modern Warfare 2, its bigger, badder, more action-packed little brother, released in November 2009, which was the first time Call of Duty would ever be the best-selling game in any given year. Rather impressive for a game that didn't release until mid-November. Activision CEO Bobby Kotick,
evil person,
called Modern Warfare 2 the largest entertainment launch in history. So then why, despite all of this success and Call of Duty rapidly kicking in the doors of the gaming industry and planting itself on the throne, was something cooking internally at the Call of Duty studios between Vince Zampella, Jason West, and the heads of Activision? It all came to a head in March of 2010, in a move that would effectively give the corporate suits the long-term handle on this franchise, and push Call of Duty down a path of increasing mediocrity almost every year since. To really understand what Vince Zampella and Jason West mean to the gaming industry, we need to get into our time machines and head back to 1997, when a young Zampella and West meet while Zampella was a producer at Segasoft and hired the Dallas video game company that was employing Jason West, and they went on to become friends. West then went on to become a lead developer at a game developing startup called 2015, and convinced Zampella to join him. Their first game would be the one and only Medal of Honor Allied Assault, published by EA, which blew up, selling over 1 million copies in its first 10 months, making it one of the most successful PC releases in history. Despite the success, however, EA ends their contract with 2015 and looks to start developing the franchise in-house going forward. Vince and Jason were looking to create their own studio with EA, but failed to get a deal complete despite extensive planning. And they would instead cut a deal with Activision, and with Grant Collier, they founded a new independent gaming developer, Infinity Ward. All 22 members of this new Infinity Ward team had worked on Medal of Honor Allied Assault, and the group, led by its trio with Activision,
Evil!
began to create a direct competitor to the Medal of Honor series, Call of Duty. I wonder how that turned out, where they would be given a large amount of freedom for creative decision making. The initial deal was that Activision would have 30% stake in Infinity Ward, supplying them $1.5 million. But they would soon go on to exercise their option to fully acquire the additional 70% for $3.5 million.
I need about 350.
Making Infinity Ward a wholly owned subsidy of Activision. Call of Duty 1 and 2 would go on to be huge successes, with the latter being the first COD to be on any console, the Xbox 360. But the success of these two games would only be a small fraction of what it would come to be. It wasn't always easy getting COD 4 into development and then a full release. Activision pushed them for another World War II game. Not exactly the greatest decision towards a team so dead set on creative freedom. What evidently paid off the most for COD 4 was the increased focus on multiplayer. And Infinity Ward had the principle of having a small development team that worked well together. And in return, they had low turnover, demonstrating what makes a good game isn't billions of dollars and thousands of devs, but a cohesive team of guys with similar goals and an overall vision for a game. It completely reshaped everything that we knew about the FPS industry. Well, what now? Vince Zampella and Jason West are two men who always knew their worth, evident by their choice to leave their previous company. They were incredibly talented, and their work has spoken for itself. Oh, you don't know what COD is? Well, guess what? Now you do. You just could not get away from this game. Naturally, being the fathers of something so massive
So big.
and being signed by a larger publisher, contract negotiations needed to be completed. The desires of Zampella and West were this: larger bonuses.
What exactly does
Infinity Ward
want?
We want more money.
A fair desire, as they were setting the gaming world on fire and deserved compensation for their work and dedication. And they also wanted full creative control over the series. And in return, they would receive reduced royalty rates, down to 20% from 35%. They would look to get their bonuses, and following the release of Modern Warfare 2, Infinity Ward would be entitled to operate as if it were independent and be permitted to choose its own development projects and release schedules. They would be entitled to creative authority over any games under the Modern Warfare brand, meaning no games can be released under said brand without the consent of Infinity Ward. I believe this is also related to the whole Modern Warfare 2 trying to release without Call of Duty on the box debacle from back in the day, because they wanted the Modern Warfare brand to be more prominent than just the Call of Duty brand. Oh, and Activision did not like that one bit. You see, what I love about these two dudes is they were so committed to having creative control over this series of games. The ability to always choose what goes into a Call of Duty and what doesn't. They were willing to sacrifice money for it. Call of Duty was truly their baby. They were going to go at Activision to have autonomy and rights in calling the shots of this franchise. But it was very evident that this would lead to a power struggle with a publisher that demands power and control. You see, the type of freedom and control that Zampella and West were set to receive was just simply unheard of in the gaming industry. It was unprecedented. They would get to quality test their own games internally without the meddling of Activision. And that might explain how One Man Army Danger Close Noob Tubes ended up into the game. But this level of autonomy is something that they had always desired to have under Activision. And they were always confident in their ability to make games on their own. Jason West said, "Well, Activision wanted us to make another World War II game. So that'd be an example of when we were pushed for something creatively, and now they have billions of dollars that they didn't have." But it was obvious that Activision had no intention of allowing this to actually go on long term. Activision's plans were conniving and greedy. They wanted to supplant these two men and completely take control over the COD franchise without any other loud presence contending over the control of the game. Now, let me give you a little bit of background on Bobby Kotick, CEO of Activision. He's not a gamer. He bought Activision out of bankruptcy in 1990 because he saw gaming as a huge investment. You see the differences here? You have guys passionate about making games versus guys passionate about owning games. This is what he said at a press conference in 2009. "We have a culture of thrift. The goal I had in bringing a lot of the packaged folk goods into Activision about 10 years ago was to take all the fun out of making video games." He also added that he's tried to instill skepticism, pessimism, and fear into the corporate culture at Activision. He's been told to have created a corporate culture that values profit over everything else. At least Bobby Kotick is very honest about his greed, being very straightforward about it during an earnings call in 2009, where he openly admitted, "If it was up to me, I would raise prices even further." This was said about Jason West in regards to working at Activision. Activision's focus on developing wildly profitable franchises and then milking them for all they were worth quickly grew stifling. Bobby and all the high-ups at Activision's plan was quite simple. Zampella and West get what they asked for, but Activision's demand was that if the two were ever to be fired, Call of Duty would fall into the hands of Activision, not Infinity Ward. I think you can see where this is going. It was clearly a conflict of interest, and I'm not sure how the two would ever agree to allow the rights to the franchise to fall back into Activision's hands. So from that point forward, Activision would be looking for a way to fire these dudes, and also not pay them the $36 million in bonuses that they were owed by contract. You see, it's Vince and Jason's accusation that Activision was trying to fire them only a few months after they signed their new contract. But Activision denies such activity. A court filing revealed an email exchange between two executives at Activision who oversaw Zampella and West.
He's just standing there, menacingly.
One of them warned that the risks of firing the pair would be great. Is everyone ready for the big negative PR story this is going to turn into if we kick them out? It became known as Project Icebreaker, the plan to find pretext to fire and replace the duo. Former IT worker Thomas Fennedy claimed in a deposition he was tasked by Activision to dig up dirt on Zampella and West. He was instructed to hack into their emails, computers, and cell phones. And Bobby Kotick promised to keep him safe and that the evidence was to be kept out of court. Fennedy reported that Activision also considered fake ruses of fire drills or building fumigation to dig into their emails.
No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
And they went as far to attempt hiring a private security firm to hack the emails, but they refused, citing legal concerns. Bobby Kotick was hard at work on finding replacements for the two, and reports say that PowerPoint slides from 2009 compare the pay of Vince Zampella and Jason West, who made about $16.3 million each in 2008 alone, to the significantly less salaries of their future replacements. All of this drama was boiling over directly and overtly in the workplace. Jason and Vince would skip meetings, insult managers, and were considered to be acting like prima donnas. There came a time where they threatened to skip the E3 demo for Modern Warfare 2.
Well, thanks everyone. We're real excited to be here tonight. We have a lot we want to share with you, but since our time is limited and we know you just want to see the game, we're going to get straight to the action. So here is Modern Warfare 2.
And Bobby Kotick's response, sent in an email to Vice Chairman Mike Griffith, was that the pair should be locked out of their building. I also love what Robert Bowling had to say about Activision's head marketer in 2008. Man, these guys are so cool, refusing to submit, seeing through the shit-eating grins and bullshit of businessmen. And then in February 2010, just 1 month before all hell broke loose, new negotiations were being discussed between both parties' lawyers. Zampella and West were willing to make Modern Warfare 3 immediately, instead of moving to an unrelated project. But after the game's completion, they would leave Activision to develop independently.
See you, chump.
Being able to take up to 10 people from Infinity Ward with them. And that's when Activision finally activated their Order 66. This is the third day of meetings between Activision's lawyers and their lawyers. Their lawyers go over, and Activision comes out of their lawyer's office, and they are talking and talking. Their lieutenant counsel says, "I don't think we can come to an agreement on this. Give this to Jason and Vince." He shoves across the table a piece of paper. What does this piece of paper say? You are hereby being notified that you are being investigated for improper conduct and breach of fiduciary duty. You may not talk to anybody about this and must cooperate in full, or that in itself will be potential grounds for termination. We haven't made any decision about what we're going to do in this investigation, whether there's any discipline to be had or termination. But you better take us very seriously. Thank you very much. That's when it became evident to Zampella and West's party that these contract negotiations were never serious.
Vince, Jason, Jason,
Copy! Does anyone copy?
Mark, Bobby.
Cleaning house. I'm working my way back to you.
Despite the negotiations going on for days, they just handed them a written out paper clearly planned to be delivered to them at some point, and now was finally the time. Activision conducted the investigation in a manner designed to maximize the inconvenience and anxiety it would cause West and Zampella. It's alleged the two were interrogated for over 6 hours in a windowless conference room, and that other Infinity Ward employees were, quote-unquote, brought to tears by Activision investigators. It seemed that anything less than full cooperation with this quote-unquote investigation would constitute insubordination. And on March 10th of 2010, Vince and Jason are escorted by security out of the studio, being fired on accusations of breach of contract and insubordination, just before they were set to receive their large bonuses for the sales of Modern Warfare 2.
You have the DSM. We got it, sir. Good. That's one less loose end.
demonetized. All targets destroyed. Solid copy.
Vince and Jason then filed a lawsuit against Activision for $36 million over unpaid bonuses and wrongful termination, suggesting that Activision's decision to fire them was founded on astonishing arrogance and unbridled greed. That number would eventually blimp to over $1 billion because of quote-unquote future earnings. Some of these unpaid bonuses are actually from Treyarch's Call of Duties, as they were entitled to bonuses for their games too, because they supplied Treyarch with an engine to make Call of Duty games on. Activision would countersue, accusing the pair of conspiring with EA to damage Activision and gross insubordination. Activision's inaccurate and misguided allegations lose sight of the reality here. None of these false claims of insubordination or breach of duties had any negative effect on Activision. None. Modern Warfare 2 had been the world's most successful video game, was said by Zampella and West's lawyer. The funniest thing about this lawsuit is Activision was trying to sue them over losses on Modern Warfare 3. Stating that Zampella and West orchestrated their own firing by having negotiations with EA, and that if they were involved in the game's development, it would have made more money. So like Activision, who actually fired them and hence lost money from not having them leading the development, are trying to get them to pay for it for something that they did. Like, Jesus, do these guys do anything for a buck? Activision had this to say about the duo. In certain respects, West and Zampella were valuable executives at the company. West and Zampella morphed from valued, responsible executives into insubordinate and self-serving schemers who attempted to hijack Activision's assets for their own personal gain. They also called them small-minded executives, almost obsessed by jealousy of other developers. Overall, the kind of language being used in this lawsuit, it was very clear. It was extremely personal and messy. These two parties f***ing hated each other. And of course, because I am an objective person, I have to mention that the accusations of meeting with EA are obviously true, considering the pair immediately founded Respawn Entertainment and signed a deal with EA. And Zampella has similar allegations against him earlier in his career when 2015 sued him for having secret negotiations with, well, EA to start a competing company with job titles, office spaces, and timelines all drawn up. The old leader at 2015 had this to say about Vince Zampella and Jason West. Zampella and West say there was no conspiracy, but no one disputes what happened next. In the days before Allied Assault's release, Kuderka's team rose up against him. Each day, Kuderka would come to the office and find a handful of resignation letters slipped under his door. By the end of January, 20 of Kuderka's 27 developers had turned in letters. People don't have any idea that Jason and Vince did the exact same thing to me that they're doing to Activision. I was a tough boss, but those guys really screwed me over good. Listen, there's no way to know who's always in the right in all of these situations, but it's clear to me about West and Zampella by what we're about to soon discuss about their employees at Infinity Ward. Evidence points that they are good people to work for. Maybe these events took place simply because of what Jason West said. We just want to make kick-ass games. That's what it's all about. These two seem to have an edge to them that I really like. In an industry full of greedy, conniving douchebags, they treat their team of guys with respect and give a big middle finger to the men trying to control and hinder them. And what does that tell you about Activision? In a world where EA is routinely labeled one of, if not the worst company in America, Vince and Jason found it necessary to attempt negotiating with them at the very height of their gaming success. I mean, they just created the biggest gaming franchise of all time.
You ever hear the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
And EA actually got dragged into the lawsuit themselves, Activision attempting to sue them for $400 million. The result is just hilarious, as it was settled out of court with EA seemingly winning, and there's a great deal of criticism that has been thrown in Activision's way for deciding to go through with this. You're allowed to talk to people who are currently employed. Pretty much every person I've ever hired was employed. You can't expect the worker to take the risk that they'll be unemployed while looking for work. So Activision's lawsuit against EA made no sense at all. The EA thing was a PR move and a shakedown, and goes to show what an awful, awful group of executives Activision has. Activision was seemingly just a big bad bully, finding a reason to fire and not pay out to the duo for any reason possible, including looking for a new job. Now, do you know how bad this world would be if your employer just had so much control over you that they could sue you for taking a job interview with another company? Talk about anti-worker practices. Now, you can imagine this would be quite the shock to the rest of Zampella and West team. And Activision, with their obvious propensity for human relations,
I'm actually a great guy.
There's actually
engaged them immediately in a confrontation that went a little like this. There was an emergency company meeting in the kitchen space. A group of top Activision high-ups were already at the studio, ready to steady the ship. The Infinity Ward team piled into the kitchen and glared at the group of executives standing behind the long kitchen island table. One of them tried explaining what was happening, which nobody on the development team bought or cared for. The response was mostly stoic silence. Then, a team member asked bluntly if we were going to be paid the bonuses we had already earned for shipping Modern Warfare 2. Reading the tense vibe in the room, another executive took his turn and tried a different strategy. Paraphrasing, he said, "Guys, if you want to stay with the studio to make Modern Warfare 3, you will receive your Modern Warfare 2 bonuses, and we will also give everyone a 50% salary increase." He paused slightly before repeating, "That is a 5 and a 0. 50%. The looks on people's faces did not change. If anything, most of the team was feeling even more upset. The executive spoke again. "Look, I get it. I know this is a tough situation, but just take the money and get over it." I specifically remember him telling us to get over it. The comment, "get over it," obviously wasn't so impactful to most of the Infinity Ward team, but I guess they were over it. Over with dealing with Activision. Because 40 of the 100 employees there would leave Activision, and most would follow Zampella and West to their new studio, Respawn, who you likely recognize for their future creations of Titanfall and Apex Legends. Like, goddamn, these dudes cannot stop making hits. Zampella and West were clearly respected by their team, giving me and the rest of the gaming community all the more reason to side with them. And respect to the devs that left instead of just taking the money. There are things in this world that money can't buy, and those are honor, integrity, loyalty, and respect. These men would have rather stood by their leaders and remained dedicated to creating awesome games free from corporate influence than take a cent of Activision's filthy money. This is what a former Infinity Ward employee said later on. "The fact that our respected studio heads, our leaders, had been canned in such a sudden and cold-blooded fashion brought the entire team a collective feeling of anger and a deep sense of unfairness. I can say with quite certainty that Bobby Kotick wouldn't get the same kind of reaction and loyalty from his guys." Here's what Vince Zampella said later down the line. "I was speechless. In my head, this was the moment when everyone was supposed to go home in a limousine. Instead, we were eating the seed corn and they were taking all the money. West drove home, broke the bad news with his wife, and got drunk." Zampella spent the evening having a talk with his son to prepare him for what he might hear about the incident at school. And there would be complaints filed by employees who joined the lawsuit with Zampella and West, that they were forbidden to discuss the lawsuit or to hire lawyers. They stated that Infinity Ward's office was turned into a police state, with security becoming a common fixture. Activision would go on to announce they reached a settlement with Zampella and West in 2012, just days before the trial. A settlement that would pay them what is thought to be tens of millions of dollars. EA called the settlement a vindication of Vince and Jason, and the right of creative artists to collect the rewards due for their hard work. You see, you know you're evil when you turn EA, of all companies, into the voice of reason. So, in the end, the flagship studio for Activision and Call of Duty was now a hollow shell of its former self, being only the same in name. At that point, they may have as well just changed the name of the studio to Finite Ward. West and Zampella would immediately go to setting up Respawn Studios, with funding from EA. They were back where they started. However, unlike with Call of Duty, they now own the intellectual rights to the franchises they create. Except, Jason West would move on. There were reports of Vince Zampella believing his erratic behavior at Activision was sabotaging the company, and during the final development of Titanfall, West was reportedly barely coming into the office. Zampella would remain in charge of Respawn, and his only comment on the matter was, "It's hard to work with one person for 15 years. Jason West's final comments on the matter were this: "It does sort of sour you on the industry. It's tough. If we can't get treated well, what possible chance does a newcomer have? How do they prevent themselves from being strong-armed by the guys with money?" I wish I had the answer to that question, but I don't. And despite losing the suit, Activision stock has risen 30%, and Bobby Kotick makes the second most of any CEO in the US, making $65 million a year. Trip Hawkins puts it best when he stated, "It's an ideological conflict. The suits are driven by money and power. The ponytails don't hate money, but what they really care about are ideas and artistic expression. Zampella and West would receive the money they were rightfully owed and would be able to move on with their lives. But in the end, it seems to me that the losers are us. Call of Duty was previously created by a team of passionate individuals who lobbied for their creative control in the franchise. And now, its keys were turned over to Bobby Kotick and his bunch of shareholders. These were people who had no clue what makes a quality game, but instead find strategies to milk as much money as possible out of a game, regardless of the methods. Call of Duty was never the same, especially as far as Infinity Ward developed games go. The deterioration of quality would be a slow burn, having infected the franchise in 2010 and continuing to spread throughout its metaphorical body for the past 16 years. While sales would remain high, the following releases from Infinity Ward's revamped team would receive significantly more criticism than Treyarch's games. MW3 received backlash for being basically a clone to Modern Warfare 2. It was the first time COD really began to feel like a Madden, where there's a slight update to an otherwise unchanged game. Ghost was the first Call of Duty that was generally considered to be overwhelmingly hated, due to a lack of compelling story or multiplayer, poor map design, and useless kill streaks. Infinite Warfare would be the most hated Call of Duty ever made, and that hate began months before it even released, becoming the most disliked trailer in YouTube's history. And I would consider that just the beginning. Because if you ask me about every Call of Duty released 2016 and onward, I would say that literally none of them are good. The originality, the passion, and innovation all seemingly disappeared from the franchise. Call of Duty was only the same in name, and that's because the two men and their team who created this once critically acclaimed franchise and built its framework were kicked to the side once Activision had got their use out of them. Now, year by year, Call of Duty is the best-selling game because this Infinity Ward team back in the early and mid-2000s made the game a cultural staple. The unfortunate and depressing truth is, there really is no winning for us fans in this industry. They fight for our money, not our loyalty. New IPs are developed with passion, but the moment they appear to be wildly popular and profitable, that's when the grifting inevitably begins. Maybe in the end, the fault of these practices don't just fall on the CEOs, but also the people who habitually buy the game franchises year by year, despite the decline. If fans can't take a stand, or utilize some impulse control, or simply just understand the principles of a supply and demand economy, it's quite simple. We'll always continue to get royally fucked. This was a long one, guys. Took a lot of research, took a lot of time to make this video, so I really hope you enjoy it.
We both know that I have to,
Two.
you know.